Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon English study group, and we're studying Volume 2, Chapters 21 through 30 of this book, Developing a Life. Actually, this is the Walking the Path with the Buddha book. This is Volume 2. I'm usually used to talking about Volume 1. So we're in Volume 2. We just restarted the Pali Canon and English study group, and the way that I do this program is we start with having a student read a particular chapter. I'm going to display those on the screen so that everybody can see those, and then after a student reads the chapter, I will share some teachings on that, and then I'll open up to any and all questions that you guys have. So if you're in Zoom, you can volunteer to read by electronically raising your hand, and then I'll be able to see that. And then afterwards, I will teach a little bit on that particular chapter and then open up to questions that you guys have. Looks like Samantha's volunteering to read. If you'd like to go ahead, ma'am.
Seeing non-self with correct wisdom. Monks, form is impermanent, feeling is impermanent, perception is impermanent, volitional formations, choices, decisions are impermanent, consciousness is impermanent. What is impermanent is discontentedness. What is discontentedness is non-self. What is non-self should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. When one sees this thus, as it really is, with correct wisdom, one holds no more views concerning the past. When one holds no more views concerning the past, one holds no more views concerning the future. When one holds no more views concerning the future, one has no more stubborn craving. When one has no more stubborn craving, the mind becomes free from strong feelings towards form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, decisions and choices, and consciousness, and is liberated from the taints by non-clinging. By being liberated, the mind is steady. By being steady, the mind is content. By being content, one is not agitated. By being unagitated, one personally attains nibbana, or enlightenment. One understands. Destroyed is birth, the holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of existence.
All right, thank you, Samantha. So this particular discourse goes back to the three universal truths. The universal truth of impermanence, discontentedness, and non-self. And if you've been in any of the foundational programs with me or learned any of that from any of the resources that I share, then you know about impermanence, discontentedness, and non-self. And here the Buddha is reminding you, and at that time he was reminding his students, but he's reminding you now that form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness are impermanent. These are referred to as the five aggregates. We studied these 2 weeks ago, where the Buddha describes a living being as having five things. There's physical form, there's feelings, there's perceptions, which are views and opinions about the world, there's volitional formations or choices, decisions, and there's a consciousness, which is the mind. And it's important to understand that all these things are impermanent because the mind's going to cling to it and hold on to it and crave for it to be permanent. That's why when you see changes with the physical body, and maybe you look in the mirror, you see a wrinkle, or you see a gray hair, you see a little bit of fat, or you see something like this, that you might become discontent if you're clinging or craving and holding on to this form. Same thing with the feelings. You might think that these feelings are permanent, and when you get frustrated or agitated or annoyed, you might just think, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever, not realizing that, hey, these feelings are impermanent. They can arise, change, and fade away. And of course, by the time you get to enlightenment, you won't have those conditioned feelings. But when you're feeling really miserable like that, it's really helpful to remind yourself that, hey, this is impermanent. I can go outside for a walk. I can take a bike ride. I can go do something, and this feeling will fade away. And then perceptions. These are your views and opinions about the world. If you've ever been in an argument with anybody about your views and opinions, this is because the mind's clinging to this, and maybe even wanting other people to agree with your views and opinions. And then there's certain choices and decisions that the mind might cling to. Like if you've ever gone on a trip or something and you've been clinging to a certain decision, maybe you really wanted to go to Australia or somewhere else, and now when you show up to the airport and the flight's delayed, or it's late, or it's somehow canceled, maybe you're upset or angry or frustrated. This is because the mind's clinging to the volitional formations, the choices and decisions. And then there's the consciousness itself, which inside the consciousness you have self-identity, like I am American, or I am Spanish, or I am Mexican, or I am Brazilian, or any of this I am around your culture, ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your nationality, maybe your job or occupation. The mind clings to this, and it doesn't understand that all these things are impermanent. And when you're clinging to the form, the feelings, the perception, the volitional formations or consciousness, and now the mind experiences this change or impermanence, the mind doesn't like it. So the Buddha is helping you to remember that, hey, all these things are impermanent that you're dealing with here. And then he says here, what is impermanent is discontentedness. And the reason why is because the mind craves permanence, right? He's not saying that here in this particular discourse, but in other discourses, you understand that the mind is craving permanence, but yet the mind experiences all this impermanence in the world, and that is where discontentedness is arising because of the craving for permanence, but yet everything is impermanent around you. So as long as the mind's craving things to be permanent, but yet you live in an impermanent world, there will be discontentedness. And then the Buddha is saying, okay, what is discontentedness? By you clinging to this physical form, to the feelings, to the perceptions, to the volitional formations and consciousness, and not realizing that it is impermanent, and there's this discontentedness arising, these certain feelings, it's important to remember this isn't you. These five aggregates is not you. It's not who you are. And that's where the Buddha says here, what is non-self should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom. Thus, this is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. So any of these things, either form, feeling, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness, if you can view them more and more as impermanent, the mind will be less and less likely to cling to it. And where you see the mind is clinging to it, that's where you got to cut that off and let it go. And then he goes into saying, okay, when one sees this with correct wisdom, one holds no more views concerning the past. What this means is that there's probably certain things in your past that have occurred that are either pleasurable or painful. And now in the present moment, you're thinking back to those situations, and the mind is experiencing conditioned pleasant feelings or painful feelings, or neither painful nor pleasant, based on things in the past. Some people call this trauma, where the mind is holding on to a particular experience, and now you form feelings in the present moment based on that. But when you understand that all these things are impermanent and you can train your mind to let it go, that's what the Buddha is saying, that okay, you hold no more views concerning the past. And when you've trained your mind to have no more views concerning the past, then you can experience the same thing about the future. Because one of the things that the mind does is it will long and yearn for things in the future. Like say you schedule a holiday 3 months from now or 6 months from now. You might be in the office at work oh, I can't wait to go on vacation. I just can't wait to get out of here and go on holiday, right? The mind is longing, yearning for this future thing. Where what the Buddha is teaching you to do is not worry about the past and not long and yearn for the future, but be content and peaceful in the present moment. And the way that you accomplish that is by eliminating craving. That's what he's sharing here, is he's showing this cause and effect that, okay, if you eliminate this stubborn craving, and it's helpful to remember that these cravings are stubborn, because as we say, cut it off and let it go, it's really like cut it off and cut it off and cut it off and cut it off and cut it off. And many months later in some of these cravings, even several years it took to eliminate some of these cravings, that you can cut these things off. They're very stubborn. It's kind of like an onion, that some of these cravings and clinging, they will come off pretty easily, like the outer layer of the onion. But as you get deeper into the core of the onion, they're harder and harder to peel back. So it's helpful to remind yourself that even the Buddha calls these cravings stubborn, right? So when one has no more stubborn craving, what the Buddha is saying is, okay, you become free from the strong feelings. That means there's no more discontentedness that arises because the mind is liberated from the taints. The taints are the pollutions, the 10 fetters, that all that pollution has been cleared out of the mind, and now the mind is free. It's liberated. It's experiencing steadiness. That's what he's saying here in the next part. The mind is now steady. It's content, and it's unagitated. When the mind is unagitated, what the Buddha is saying is, okay, you've attained nibbana at this point, or enlightenment, because the mind's peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. It's steady, it's stable, it's unshakable, because there's no craving. Because as you guys probably know, when you have craving in the mind, if the mind gets what it wants, it gets those pleasant feelings. And if it doesn't get what it wants, it gets the painful feelings. But when you eliminate all that stubborn craving, what the Buddha is saying is you don't hold on to things in the past, you don't hold on to things in the future. All this craving has been eliminated. You're not clinging to these 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. And now the mind is free and liberated. And having accomplished that, you will know, because it'll be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you won't experience any discontentedness. And at that same time, you'll know that destroyed is birth. What this means is that you understand by that point that having gotten to enlightenment and eliminated your cravings, desires, attachments, and be able to see clearly that your mind is enlightened, you will also know that you've eliminated the cycle of rebirth. Because the same causes and conditions that are producing discontentedness are the same things that are producing rebirth. So when you're studying closely, independently verifying each one of the teachings of the Buddha, and his teachings have led you exactly where he said, to this steady, content, unagitated, calm, and peaceful and joyful mind. When your mind is experiencing that, and you know that the cravings, desires, attachments is what was producing the discontentedness, and that's also what produces rebirth. Having eliminated all your cravings, there's no more fire. There's no more holding on to this world. So you're no longer going to experience rebirth. And then the Buddha is saying, okay, the holy life has been lived. What this means is you've lived a pure life. No matter what you did in the past, no matter what you've done up to this point in your life, you can purify your mind. And now for the rest of your life, as an enlightened being, you will live this peaceful and joyful life, that the mind's been purified, that you're no longer causing harm to others, and harm isn't coming back to you. And that's why the Buddha says what had to be done has been done, meaning you've trained your mind. You've done what you needed to do. You're out of here. It's like, peace out. See you guys later, right? If you've ever been to one of those escape rooms or something like that, I've never done one of those, but I've seen it on TV and on YouTube, where people go into this room and they lock all the doors, and you got to go around as a group, and you got to find all the clues and all these different things to be able to escape out of this escape room. Well, essentially the teachings of the Buddha are helping you to understand how to escape out of all of this, out of this constant cycle of rebirth. And what had to be done has been done. You've seen all the teachings, you've independently verified them, you've trained your mind, and now you've escaped, because you're no longer going to experience any discontentedness, and you're not going to experience any more rebirth. there is no more for this state of existence, that you'll never experience another rebirth. And by the time we get to volume 11, you're going to be learning about the cycle of rebirth much more deeply than what you've learned so far. And you're going to see the teachings about how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. Because as you guys know, there's nothing to believe in the teachings of the Buddha, including the cycle of rebirth. But even in these early stages of looking at the words of the Buddha, you're going to see this underlying aspect that he's reminding you that, hey, having gotten to enlightenment, you're also not going to experience continuous rebirth either. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this one, where the Buddha is helping you to see that none of these 5 aggregates are you. It's non-self, this universal truth of non-self. The form, the feeling, the perception, the volitional formations, nor the consciousness is you and who you are. But the mind needs to be able to see that more and more clearly, because the mind has that confusion due to the pollutions that are in the mind. It's the fetter of personal existence view, the very first fetter. Any questions on this one? Okay, thank you guys on YouTube for letting me know about the sound. It looks like we've got that fixed. And thank you for Chrissy for logging in to let me know. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. Okay, so I've talked about personal existence view and the universal truth of non-self and other programs. So in this program, I just kind of talk about it briefly, and then if you guys would like to penetrate more deeply into any of these teachings, you just let me know. Is there someone who would like to read chapter 22? Okay, Julie, I happen to see your hand. Okay, there's Brent and Vibhav. Julie didn't use her electronic hand, but I saw her physical hand just happened to be on the screen. Let's go to Julie, and then the next one, Brent, if you'd like to take that, and then Vibhav, you can take the next one after that.
One who is engaged is unliberated. One who is disengaged is liberated. Monks, one who is engaged is unliberated. One who is disengaged is liberated. Consciousness, monks, while standing, might stand engaged with form, based upon form, established upon form, with a sprinkling of excitement, it might come to growth, increase, and expansion. Or consciousness, while standing, might stand engaged with feeling, based upon feeling, established upon feeling, with a sprinkling of excitement, it might come to growth, increase, and expansion. Or consciousness, while standing, might stand engaged with perception, based upon perception, established upon perception, with a sprinkling of excitement, it might come to growth, increase, and expansion. Or consciousness, while standing, might stand engaged with volitional formations, choices, decisions, based upon volitional formations, established upon volitional formations, with a sprinkling of excitement, it might come to growth, increase, and expansion. Monks, though someone might say, separated from form, separated from feeling, separated from perception, separated from volitional formations, I will make known the coming and going of consciousness, its passing away and rebirth, its growth, increase, and expansion is impossible. Monks, if a monk has abandoned desire for the form aggregate, with the abandoning of craving, the basis is cut off. There is no support for the establishment of consciousness. If he has abandoned desire for the feeling aggregate, for the perception aggregate, for the volitional formations aggregate, for the consciousness aggregate, with the abandoning of craving, the basis is cut off. There is no support for the establishing consciousness. When that consciousness is unestablished, not coming to growth, non-generative, the mind is liberated. By being liberated, the mind is steady. By being steady, the mind is content. By being content, one is not agitated. Being unagitated, one personally attains nibbana, or enlightenment. One understands, destroyed is birth. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of existence.
Okay, thank you, Julie. So here, the Buddha is using the word engaged as craving or clinging, and the word disengaged as non-craving or non-clinging. It's just a different word and a different way to explain the teachings. So what he's saying is one who has craving and clinging, engaged, is unliberated. The mind is not free. It's going to continue to experience discontentedness. When one's mind is disengaged, meaning it doesn't have craving and clinging, then the mind is liberated. And then he goes through and he says, okay, the consciousness, monks, meaning the mind, while standing, may be engaged with form, and then he has feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and then the consciousness itself. These are the 5 aggregates that he's describing. He's saying, okay, if somebody were to say that being separated from these 5 aggregates, that they will make known the coming and going of the consciousness, meaning they will explain the cycle of rebirth because they have separated themselves from the 5 aggregates, that now this person is going to teach the coming and going and the cycle of rebirth and how the consciousness comes into the world. The Buddha is saying that's impossible, that you can't understand the cycle of rebirth and the coming and going of consciousness by just being separated from these things, because just being separated from something hasn't eliminated the actual craving. And that's where he goes into this next part, and he says the way to get to that point where you understand what's going to happen to the consciousness in the cycle of rebirth is to abandon the craving, abandon the desire. By abandoning it, that's where you actually can completely abolish craving and cut it off at the base, that the craving has no ability to continue for consciousness to continue to reestablish. You're going to see in other teachings that he has where he talks about craving is the fuel that causes rebirth. Here he's getting to the same thing, but he's saying it in a much more detailed way, where in other teachings he just says it very clear, very concise, that craving is the fuel that causes rebirth. Here he's getting to the same thing, but he's talking about it in much more detail. That if you're clinging and craving and holding on to these 5 aggregates, form, feeling, perceptions, volitional formations, which are the choices and decisions, or the consciousness, then as long as you're holding on to these things, the mind's going to keep experiencing discontentedness and keep experiencing rebirth over and over and over again. But it's not just separating yourself from these things that the mind can now see the cycle of rebirth. It's abandoning and completely eliminating the craving, desire, attachment. And now you'll be able to see that there's no more support for establishing a new consciousness. The way that you can think about it is, say you have a fire and there's logs that are being tossed on the fire, and the logs are the fuel that's causing this fire to burn. And now with these fuel on the fire, these logs, it's going to send off sparks, and these sparks are carried by the wind. And when that spark lands on the ground, it's going to ignite a new fire. It's a completely new fire, completely different from the original fire. But because there was fuel on the original fire, it created a spark that created a new fire. And the same thing is true, that if you have craving, desire, attachment in the mind, that's the fuel that's causing the next spark or the next consciousness to be established. And the Buddha is explaining that in detailed form here. And you're going to see different discourses that he shares that kind of help you see it from different perspectives over the course of this Pali Canon and English study group. So when consciousness is unestablished, not coming to growth, non-generative, the mind is liberated, meaning that, hey, there's no more craving in the mind, so there's no more discontentedness, and there's no more ability for this consciousness to continue because it's extinguished its fuel. And now the mind is liberated, it's peaceful and it's joyful. Then that's where he says, okay, just like the last discourse, that the mind's steady, content, not agitated, the mind has actually attained enlightenment, and there's no more rebirth anywhere in the cycle of rebirth. Okay, so do you guys have any questions on this discourse that you guys would like to ask? I think Helena has a question from the last discourse, which I'll go back to, but I would just like to see if there's any from this one. Yes, she has one on this one as well. Question on chapter 22, please. Could we say that being disengaged means just going with the flow, surfing the wave, catching the wind, just floating, nothing to grab onto and nothing to deeply engage with? Really? just being like air adapting to ever-changing configurations of energy? I wouldn't describe it that way. What he's describing here is that by craving and clinging, that the mind is unliberated. So there's two opposite sides here that the unenlightened mind typically sees. You might be able to see the craving and the clinging and the holding on, right? Like that's something that I teach in all the foundational classes, where the mind's longing, yearning, and trying to fulfill its desires with some object. But then the opposite side of that is what you're talking about there, with the go with the flow, just not really paying attention to anything, almost like indifference. But there's this middle way where, for example, related to these five aggregates, that you don't crave and cling to this physical form, checking every little cell on your face, every little hair, making sure every little thing is exactly correct. That would be craving and clinging. But the other side of that would be like not attending to the body whatsoever, right? There's this middle way where you can wisely understand that it's wise to have good hygiene, that you take a shower regularly, that you brush your teeth regularly, that you do the things that you need in order to have good hygiene around this body, right? So that's the middle way, that you're wisely making decisions about your hygiene, but you're not craving and clinging to these kinds of things. That if you get a rash somewhere, that you realize, okay, well, I just need to go get some medicine. Let me rub some medicine on this rash, and it's going to be a matter of a few weeks, and then now this will be gone. Instead of like, oh my goodness, I got a rash. Oh, this is so miserable. Oh, this is so horrible. That's one side. The other side is, who cares? Like it's just a rash and it'll just go away on its own, and not paying attention to it whatsoever. Now it just spreads and spreads and spreads. But instead, there's this middle way where you recognize like, hey, this body is not going to be permanently healthy. It's going to experience lack of health in some situations. Let me just make some wise decisions to go get it taken care of. And that would be the middle way. Okay. Any other questions on chapter 22 before I go back to Helena's question on chapter 21? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions there. So let me go back to Helena's question on 21. The permanent things are enlightenment and the universal laws of existence. If there are other universes, they could operate under different laws, right? Maybe there's even more than just one God creator, which totally makes sense to me. And consequently, there is a series of very differentiated universes creations. So when we talk about the universal laws of existence, are we perhaps narrowing this notion down to our universe? So all the things that you're saying there, this is what the Buddha would describe as speculation about the world. That he describes that if you tried to speculate about the world, that it would lead to either madness or frustration. All we can do is look at true reality of what we know to be true. None of us have lived necessarily in another universe or another place. So right now we're existing here on this planet. We can look around the world around us and we can independently confirm the natural laws of existence as we experience them through the Buddha explaining to us what they are. And then we learn those, we reflect on them to independently verify them, and we practice them. But all these other things that you're talking about would fall under the category of speculation about the world. And this is where the mind can oftentimes become very diluted and confused and having misunderstandings. And the Buddha describes that speculation about the world leads to either madness or frustration. And he talks about other things that lead to madness and frustration too, and this is just one of them. If you ever have been into conspiracy theories, or if you've known somebody that's been into conspiracy theories, that's like speculation about the world. You don't have independent, verifiable proof of something. And if you've ever been into that, you'll see how your mind just gets into madness and frustration. So it's better to not pay attention to any of those kinds of things, and instead just focus on the natural laws as you understand them, as they're being taught, and you can independently verify based on everything that we experience here. In my opinion, if this is what we experience here and these are natural laws, I suspect that other planets and other universes are experiencing the same things, the same natural laws, but we don't know that to be true. So it's best to not speculate about it, because what's going to lead to your enlightenment in this life is to get to wisdom, that you can independently verify the truth about the natural laws of existence that you're experiencing. And that's what's going to lead to your enlightenment in this life. Okay, looks like Julie, you might have a question.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, I sure can.
Okay. I'm just on the usage or the translation, whatever, of consciousness while standing. Does that mean while one is thinking, while the mind is operating, it's not asleep, you're not unconscious?
Right. We could take this literally to be like you're standing up, engaged, or we could think about it as the mind is standing still. But essentially, the Buddha is saying, okay, the consciousness, I tend to read these things very literal and I don't interpret things. So if we take it very literal, what he's saying is the consciousness monks, while standing, meaning, standing in one place, might stand
Okay, not
engaged
the
with form.
consciousness is standing, but the monk is standing and his consciousness then is engaged.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't know it. Yeah, it's just unclear. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's best when you're reading the words of the Buddha because he teaches in general in life that we shouldn't ever try to read into anything. He says, the herd is the herd and the seen is the seen. You'll see this in his teachings. This is where you learn to not cling to any perceptions. A perception is like your views and opinions, or maybe like an assumption, right? You're not interested in clinging to an assumption. So the Buddha says, okay, when you're out and about in the world, that essentially you shouldn't try to read into something. So let's just say you walk into your child's room and you see a whole mess all over their floor. And maybe you told them to clean their room 3 hours ago, and now you walked in and you see them sitting in the middle of the floor with all this stuff all over the place. If you cling to your perception, the perception is you haven't cleaned your room, right? But maybe what happened is they actually cleaned their room, but maybe 3 seconds before you walked in, they might have bumped into a cabinet and then something fell off the cabinet and sprawled all over the floor and spread out all over the floor. And now if you cling to the perception that they haven't cleaned their room, you might accuse them of being lazy or complacent or lying or something like this. So the Buddha teaches never to cling to any kind of perceptions, and only the seen is the seen and the heard is the heard. So when I see things like this, I don't try to read into it and interpret it. I just read it as it is, that if he's saying consciousness monks while standing, then okay, what that means to us is while standing in one spot. And then that way you're not trying to interpret things and kind of go off script, so to speak, that you can just see exactly what he said. Okay, you're welcome, Helena. Pleased to help you. Let's see. Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else. So let's go to chapter 23. And I think Brent was volunteering to read that one. If you'd like to go ahead, sir. You'll just have to unmute yourself.
Right and wrong refuge. They go to many a refuge, to mountains and forests, to parks and tree shrines, people threatened with danger. That's not the secure refuge, not the supreme refuge. That's not the refuge, having gone to which you gain release from all discontentedness and stress. But when, having gone to the Buddha, the teachings, and the community for refuge, you see with right wisdom the Four Noble Truths: stress, the cause of stress, the transcending of stress, and the Noble Eightfold Path, the way to the stilling of stress. That's the secure refuge, the supreme refuge, that is the refuge, having gone to which you gain release from all discontentedness and stress.
Okay, thank you, sir. So what the Buddha is describing here is that, maybe you get really stressed, you get really angry or agitated or annoyed or frustrated at work, and maybe you think that, okay, the best way to deal with this is go get a cabin in the mountains somewhere and retreat and go to this refuge for a week or two, and that's going to handle all your stress, right? But that doesn't actually fix it. That's why the Buddha is calling it this wrong refuge, that it's not a secure refuge. It's not the supreme refuge. It's not going to help you gain this release from all discontentedness and stress. But people run to these kinds of places, whether it's mountains or forest or parks or tree shrines. When they're threatened with danger or they're experiencing stress, they might run away to the mountains and try to find a secure place and think that this is somehow going to solve things. But the Buddha is essentially saying that's not going to solve it, because craving, desire, attachment is in the mind. Just physically moving to a different location isn't actually going to solve the problem. Here in Chiang Mai, you sometimes see Westerners that will leave their home country because they're having a really horrible time in their home country. And they come to Thailand thinking that everything's going to be better. And they get here, and within a matter of months, they're just as angry and frustrated and irritated and having just as many problems as they had in their home country, because their mind followed them here. Right? The mind is following you around, and that's where the real problem is. That's where the craving, desire, attachment is. So the Buddha is describing that the way to actually get a release and a refuge from this stress, this supreme refuge, and to gain release from discontentedness is going to the Buddha, the teachings, and the community, having confidence in him, the teachings, and the community, so that you can start developing your wisdom of the Four Noble Truths. That's the very beginning of the path to enlightenment. And when someone comes to the path, they may not have confidence in the Buddha. So as you're learning and practicing and developing the teachings, you're independently verifying them and getting them more and more into your life, this is where your confidence improves, because you see the condition of the mind improving. And it's the Eightfold Path that's going to help completely guide you to this secure refuge where the mind is completely eliminated all discontentedness. It's completely out of the mind, because it's the Eightfold Path that is going to train the mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. So it's not the tree shrines or the mountains or that cabin in the woods or that beachfront property or laying on the beach. And while we may do those things from time to time because it's nice to go away and do those kinds of things, but that's not what's going to give you the permanent release of your discontentedness. And the Buddha is helping you to understand that, because even during his time, people did the same exact things where they would maybe run away to a place like that thinking it's going to solve their problems. So any questions here on this chapter? Yes, Vibhav.
Thank you, David. I was wondering why the word stress is used as not like I seen commonly in other places. Is a specific meaning to stress here?
Yeah, so what's happening here is rather than using the word discontentedness over and over and over again, the word stress is being used because that's one of the discontentedness, right? So if you use the same word repetitively in every single discourse, it kind of get drilled into the head, yes, but, maybe his students who are learning this maybe wouldn't relate to it as closely. So by changing the word slightly, you are able to then help the teaching relate to your audience and understand it better and then practice it better. But what he is referring to here is discontentedness. So what he's saying is seeing with right wisdom, discontentedness, the cause of discontentedness, the elimination of discontentedness, and the Eightfold Path, which is the way to completely eliminate discontentedness. But there's a little bit of a changing of words to help it be more relatable to some people who maybe have already seen it a number of different ways that he describes it in other discourses, and now here there's a slight change because of impermanence, right? He's not going to always say it exactly the same way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I think Vibhav, you're up for reading. So if you'd like to read the next chapter, this one is chapter 24.
A monk who is concentrated understands things as they really are. Monks develop concentration. A monk who is concentrated understands that things as they really are. And what does he understand as it really is? He understands that it really is. This is discontentedness. He understands that it really is. This is the cause of discontentedness. He understands that it really is. This is the elimination of discontentedness. He understands that it really is. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Monks develop concentration. A monk who is concentrated understands things as they really are. Therefore, monks, an effort should be made to understand. This is discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the cause of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the elimination of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So the Buddha is talking about concentration. And as you've seen in the Eightfold Path and his other teachings that you'll see as you're learning in this program, he constantly points to concentration, that focus, that clarity of mind, and the concentration, being able to focus on a single object. Because when your mind's polluted with those 10 fetters, you have what's called muddle-mindedness. The Buddha talks about this and he uses this phrase of muddle-minded or muddle-mindedness, where the mind is confused and lacking concentration. But when you get these pollutions out of the mind and the mind can perform optimally, your mind can be focused and concentrated. So when you develop concentration, your mind's going to be able to be more focused, not just about the Four Noble Truths, which the Buddha is talking about here, is making sure that you really understand the Four Noble Truths and being concentrated, be able to see the truth, but also in your day-to-day work, in your personal life too, you can have this concentration that you need. So here he's just mentioning concentration and saying, okay, develop this concentration, focus on the Four Noble Truths, make sure you understand the Four Noble Truths, because then you're going to be able to see things clearly in the world. When you have pollution in your mind, it's like looking out at the world through a dirty window. And now your mind can't be concentrated. It's all shaken up and it's muddled. But what you're doing on this path is cleaning off the window, and you're looking out at the world through this clean window. And the first thing you need to be able to understand is the Four Noble Truths. If you've ever been hiking on a hiking trail or something like that, and at the beginning of the hiking trail, there's like a trailhead where there's like a sign that says, okay, you start off on this trail, you're going to walk for about a mile, you're going to go down a ravine, you're going to cross a stream, you're going to go walk up this hill, you're going to loop around, and it's going to come back to the parking lot, right? There's like a trailhead at the beginning of each hiking trail. Not every hiking trail, but a lot of them, right? And this kind of gives you a heads up about what you're going to encounter. Well, the Four Noble Truths is that trailhead for the path to enlightenment. It's explaining to you the problem, the cause, the elimination, and the path forward. And we've studied this at different times. So the Buddha is going to point to that constantly in his teachings, because that's the beginning of the path. And anybody who's interested in getting on the path to enlightenment is going to need to start with the Four Noble Truths. That's the best place to start. And then that's what puts into place the development of concentration, because with the Four Noble Truths, you're able to then make a real effort towards clarifying the mind, because you now understand what's actually causing the mind to be shaken up. But if you didn't understand what was causing it through the Four Noble Truths, you wouldn't actually be able to fix it. And you'd like to develop concentration. So wherever you see your mind wandering, like say you're in a business meeting and you see your mind wandering, you need to be diligent to cut that off and let it go. Or if we're in class right now and we're talking, we're discussing, you need to be able to cut that off and let it go if there's anything that comes up in the mind. You're never interested in, say, typing out an email and having a YouTube video playing in the background, because your mind's having to constantly switch back and forth like this. Or if you're watching TV and eating at the same time, the more you cut those kinds of things out, the mind's going to get honed to be more and more concentrated. The way that I describe it is it's like a piece of wood, and you take a steel rod and you grind this back and forth over the steel rod, and it makes a deeper and deeper groove in the wood. And initially, the steel rod's going to bounce around. But as you get more and more passes back and forth with this steel rod, it gets deeper and deeper into the groove, and the steel rod's less and less likely to pop out. And when it does pop out, you know that, and you can bring it right back. But eventually, if you get this steel rod in this groove deep enough, it'll never pop out. And your mind is the same way. If you keep bouncing the mind around by watching TV and eating, or writing an email and having a YouTube video playing or something like this, your mind's just going to keep bouncing around. But if you can get really dedicated that when you're eating, you're eating. When you're watching TV, you're watching TV. When you're writing out an email, you're just writing out an email. You just do one thing at a time. More and more, your concentration is going to get honed, and you can develop this concentration. Of course, you're going to need breathing mindfulness meditation to be able to help you to develop your concentration. That's part of what's helping you to develop your concentration. So if you don't already have a breathing mindfulness meditation practice built up, you're going to need to gradually build that up to 2 or 3 sessions for 30 minutes or more, keeping in mind that it takes a good 6 months, a year, even 2 years to build up to that. But between the meditation and practicing singleness of mind in day-to-day life, that's what's going to build this concentration. And I think all of you guys at this point have studied the Four Noble Truths with me, so you have penetrated into the Four Noble Truths, that at this point you should understand without a shadow of a doubt that you have independently verified that yes, there's discontentedness in the unenlightened mind. It goes up and down and up and down. It's unstable. It's shakeable. That yes, it's craving, desire, attachment that's causing this. And yes, you can eliminate these cravings and you can see that the discontentedness is dissipated and eliminated. And then you can see that it's the Eightfold Path that's leading you towards that. If you haven't independently verified the Four Noble Truths, that's something that it's very important that you do. And then you work to develop your concentration with breathing mindfulness meditation in practicing singleness of mind in day-to-day life. So let me know if you guys have questions on this chapter. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So we'll go to the next one, which is chapter 25. Is there someone who would like to volunteer to read this one? Okay, Brent, go ahead, sir.
Gradual progress in these teachings and discipline. It is possible, Brahmin, to describe gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress in these teachings and discipline. Just as, Brahmin, when a clever horse trainer obtains a fine thoroughbred colt, he first makes him get used to wearing the bit, and afterwards trains him further. So when the Tathagata obtains a person to be tamed, he first guides him thus. Come, monk, be virtuous, practice moral conduct, restrain with the restraint of the guidelines of these teachings, be perfect in conduct and determination, and see misery in the slightest fault, train by undertaking the training precepts. When, Brahmin, the monk is virtuous, practicing moral conduct, and seeing misery in the slightest fault, trains by undertaking the training precepts, then the Tathagata guides him further. Come, monk, guard the doors of your sense bases, on seeing a form with the eye, not grasping at its signs and features. Since, if you were to leave the eye unguarded, evil, unwholesome states of craving and displeasure might invade you. Practice the way of its restraint. Guard the eye sense base. Undertake the restraint of the eye sense base. On hearing a sound with the ear, on smelling an odor with the nose, on tasting a flavor with the tongue, on touching a physical object with the body, on recognizing a mental object with the mind, are explained in the same repetitive formulas. When, Brahmin, the monk guards the doors of his sense bases, then the Tathagata guides him further. Come, monk, be moderate in eating, reflecting wisely. You should take food neither for amusement nor for intoxication, nor for the sake of physical beauty and attractiveness, but only for the endurance and continuance of this body, for ending discomfort, and for assisting the holy life, considering, thus I shall terminate old feelings without entertaining new feelings, and I shall be healthy and blameless, and shall live in comfort. When, Brahmin, the monk is moderate in eating, then the Tathagata guides him further. Come, monk, be devoted to wakefulness during the day while walking back and forth and sitting. Purify your mind of obstructed states. In the first watch of the night while walking back and forth and sitting, purify your mind of obstructed states. In the middle watch of the night, you should lie down on the right side in the lion's pose with one foot overlapping the other, mindful and fully aware, after noting in your mind the time for rising. After rising in the third watch of the night, while walking back and forth and sitting, purify your mind of obstructed states. When, Brahmin, the monk is devoted to wakefulness, then the Tathagata guides him further. Come, monk, be possessed of mindfulness and full awareness. Act in full awareness when going forward and returning. Act in full awareness when looking ahead and looking away. Act in full awareness when flexing and extending your limbs. Act in full awareness when wearing your robes and carrying your outer robe and bowl. Act in full awareness when eating, drinking, consuming food, and tasting. Act in full awareness when defecating and urinating. Act in full awareness when walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, talking, and keeping silent. When, Brahmin, the monk possesses mindfulness and full awareness, then the Tathagata guides him further. Come, monk, make use of a secluded resting place, the forest, the root of a tree, a mountain, a ravine, a hillside cave, a charnel ground, a jungle thicket, an open space, a heap of straw. He makes use of a secluded resting place, the forest, the root of a tree, a mountain, a ravine, a hillside cave, a charnel ground, a jungle thicket, an open space, a heap of straw. On returning from his alms round, gathering food, after his meal he sits down, folding his legs crosswise, setting his body erect and establishing mindfulness before him. Abandoning sensual desires for the world, he resides with the mind free from sensual desires. He purifies his mind from sensual desires. Abandoning ill will and hatred, he resides with mind free from ill will, compassionate for the welfare of all living beings. He purifies his mind from ill will and hatred. Abandoning complacency, he resides free from complacency, deeply understands of the light, mindful and fully aware. He purifies his mind from complacency. Abandoning restlessness and worry, he resides unagitated with the mind inwardly peaceful. He purifies his mind from restlessness and worry. Abandoning doubt, he resides having gone beyond doubt, unconfused about wholesome states with confidence. He purifies his mind from doubt. Having thus abandoned these 5 hindrances, imperfections of the mind that weaken wisdom, quite distant from sense desires, distant from unwholesome mental states, enters and resides in the first jhana, which is with thinking and pondering, based in seclusion, filled with excitement and joy. And with the subsiding of thinking and pondering, by gaining inner tranquility and oneness of mind, he enters and resides in the second jhana, which is without thinking and pondering, based in concentration, filled with excitement and joy. And with the fading away of excitement, remaining imperturbable, mindful, and clearly aware, he experiences in himself the joy of which the noble ones say, "Peaceful is he who resides with equanimity and mindfulness." He enters the third jhana, and having given up pleasure and pain, with the fading away of former gladness and sadness, he enters and resides in the fourth jhana, which is beyond pleasure and pain, and purified by equanimity and mindfulness. This is my instruction, Brahmin, to those monks who are in the higher training, whose minds have not yet attained the goal, who reside aspiring to the supreme security from bondage, enlightenment. But these things conduce both to a peaceful residing here and now, and to mindfulness and full awareness for those monks who are arahants, with taints destroyed, who have lived the holy life, done what had to be done, laid down the burden, reached the true goal, destroyed the fetters of existence, and are completely liberated through final knowledge, wisdom.
Okay, thank you, Brent. There's a lot to discuss here, so I'm going to really take my time with this discourse, and as we go, feel free to ask questions. First, let's just talk about what a Brahmin is, because I think this might be the first time in this program that we've encountered a discourse where the Buddha is referring to a Brahmin. During the lifetime of the Buddha, there was the Buddha who was teaching, and then there was lots of other teachers who were claiming that it was their teachings that led to enlightenment. You might think that, if the Buddha is in existence, that would be the only game in town, so to speak, and everybody would want to learn with the Buddha. But not everybody knew that he was a Buddha. They didn't understand what a Buddha was or how to determine that he was a Buddha. So while he understood he was a Buddha, and some of his students understood he was a Buddha, not everybody by and large understood that he was a Buddha. So there was various teachers that were claiming that it was their teachings that led to enlightenment. But we know it was the teachings of the Buddha that led to enlightenment, and that's why they're still here today. And prior to the Buddha, there were Brahmin. This was like a class system that in this region of the world, which today we refer to as Northeast India in Nepal, there was this hierarchy that if you were born into certain families, you were either considered rich and affluent or holy or any number of different things. You could be born into a family of laborers and people considered you to be poor and impoverished and uneducated. And what this caste system was designed for is to keep people in a certain class, and that people wouldn't cross over class and, kind of mix and match. But these Brahmin, this was about 15% of society that was considered to be holy people. And that if you were born into this family, you were considered to be holy. And they would then perform rites and rituals and ceremonies and worship for the common people. And the common people would come, this other 85% of the population, to pay these people money to be able to do rites and rituals and ceremonies and worship on their behalf. And the thought was that you would give these people money, they would do some rites and rituals and ceremonies and worship, and you were supposed to go home and your life was going to get better. But the Buddha knew that this wasn't true and it didn't work, because it's all about cultivating your mind, acquiring wisdom, making wise decisions that produces wholesome results. And when you make unwise decisions, it produces unwholesome results. So the Buddha was teaching that it's based on your actions. It's based on your wisdom that determines whether you're holy or not. It's not based on where you're born, because you could be born into a certain family that is considered holy, but you could do unwise things and impure things, and now you're experiencing unwholesome results. So these Brahmin that were doing all these different ceremonies and rites and rituals and ceremonies, they knew of the Buddha, and they would oftentimes come to him and ask him for teachings and guidance, because they started learning more and more that he was capable of sharing teachings that led to this improved and better way of life. So the Buddha's here teaching a particular Brahmin, or we might refer to this person as a Hindu priest, and he's being asked to describe what is the gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress that he shares. In other words, how does he guide a student from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4 in developing their mind on this path to enlightenment? So the Buddha is relating this to how a horse trainer trains a horse, that when the Buddha receives a new student, he's going to kind of go through a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 process. And here he's starting to describe that process that he goes through. In other discourses, he talks about how the very first thing that he teaches is the Four Noble Truths. He doesn't mention it here, but if you see the totality of the teachings of the Buddha, you will come to understand that the very first thing that he taught was the Four Noble Truths. And then after you understand the Four Noble Truths, the very next thing he would teach you is the moral conduct, like right speech, right action, and right livelihood, in the 5 precepts, things like this. Because if you understand right view, that your mind is causing your own discontentedness, and now you've got to work to extinguish these cravings, desires, attachments, and you're working to make wise decisions through training your mind and making wise decisions in your day-to-day life, the longer you're out in the world being bitter and harsh and hostile and making unwise decisions about your speech, your actions, and your livelihood, that's the more harm you're putting out in the world. And now that's all got to come back to you. You got to experience the results of those things. So once you establish right view, right away he would teach moral conduct so that you can shut down the unwise things that you're doing where you're causing harm to others through your speech, your actions, or your livelihood. So that's what he's talking about here, is to train in the moral conduct, right speech, right action, right livelihood, which includes the 5 precepts. Then once an individual has learned that, and then now they're mastering the moral conduct, now he would move to the next step. And of course, this could take several months just to master the moral conduct, perhaps, right? So now the next thing he teaches is the 6 sense bases and guarding your doors of the 6 sense bases. What the 6 sense bases are is this is your eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind itself. This is how you experience contact. The mind will experience contact through these doorways. And anytime you experience this contact, if you have a craving in the mind and you see this contact as agreeable, then you'll experience these pleasant feelings. But if you see this contact as disagreeable based on your cravings, then you will experience the painful feelings. So if you see something, like say you see a parent walking down the street holding the hand of a child, and you're like, that's so beautiful. Look at them walking together. That's so lovely, right? And you might get these pleasant feelings. Maybe these goosebumps come over the body, right? Because you maybe have a craving to see all children walking peacefully with their parents and being loving and kind and warm with their parents. And now there's these conditioned pleasant feelings of happiness. But then you turn the corner and maybe you see a parent slap their child across their face, right? And this is the impermanent nature of the world, that not every parent treats their child in a certain way. So now when you see that, maybe based on your craving that you want all children to be safe, when you see that and you see the child get slapped, now maybe you experience anger and frustration. So any kind of cravings you have in your mind, you're going to experience contact through the 6 sense bases. And with these cravings, you're wanting things to be permanently pleasing and permanently agreeable. And now when you have contact that is agreeable, that's where the pleasant feelings arise. And then when you have disagreeable contact, that's when the painful feelings arise. And it's happening through all the 6 doorways of the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind itself. And if you need examples of each one of these, I can give you examples of each individual one so that you can see very clearly how you're experiencing contact, and then your mind's going to see it as agreeable or disagreeable. So what the Buddha is saying here is that he teaches next, after the moral conduct, to guard your doorways. And whenever he talks about guarding the mind or guarding the doorways or guarding the doors of the sense bases, this is actual mindfulness, that you kind of protect the mind, that you don't allow the mind to arise conditioned feelings based on contact through the 6 sense bases. And this takes time to develop too. It's not instantaneous. So the Buddha is here saying, okay, seeing a form with the eye, you don't grasp at its signs and features. Here's an example that I can give you. Say that there's a certain handsome man or a certain beautiful woman that is in the mall, and you're walking through the mall and you happen to look up and they're walking in front of you, and you just see their hips walking side to side, or you just see this muscular shoulder, this muscular rear end, or these nice legs, or whatever it is that you're looking at. If you're guarding your doorways and you see that and you feel and notice this central desire arising in the mind, you need to be able to guard the mind. And what you might decide to do in this case is duck into a store and break contact, because as long as you have contact through the sense spaces, the mind's central desire is going to keep rising up and rising up. So you'd like to kind of step aside, go into a store for a minute or 2 or 3, look around, and then when you come out, that person won't be there when you're walking through the mall. Right? This is just one thing that you could potentially do. And there's other options too. You don't have to do it this way, but this is the way that you would do it. Because if you leave the eye unguarded, then what the Buddha is saying is this evil, unwholesome states of craving and displeasure might invade you, right? Because let's just say you're walking behind that beautiful woman or that handsome man, and now this unwholesome thought of craving and sexual cravings come up in your mind, and now maybe you want to act upon that. And now your moral conduct is such that you're acting upon that, and maybe you're already in a relationship and you're damaging your relationship. So the Buddha is teaching you to restrain the mind, pull this back. It's almost like you're riding a horse. If you've ever ridden a horse and you pull the reins of a horse, that's what you're doing with your mind, is you're restraining the mind. And that's why I give you the suggestion of maybe ducking into a store, or maybe going to the bathroom, or turning around and walking the other way, right? Rather than just sit there and grasping at the signs and features of this particular thing that you're looking at. Right? And this is an example with a human being, but it could be maybe jewelry or a car or any number of things that you might be grasping through your eyes, your ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, or the mind itself. And that's what the Buddha is describing here, is all the 6 sense bases. Okay, so now once somebody understands the 6 sense bases and guarding the mind with those, then the Buddha describes further some additional training, where you learn to eat in moderation, where you don't eat excessively. During the lifetime of the Buddha, he would teach people to eat 1 meal a day. You don't have to eat 1 meal a day in order to get to enlightenment, particularly as a household practitioner, because your caloric needs and what you need for calories is oftentimes much higher. Especially if you have young kids and you're out there running around playing basketball or football or some other kind of thing, you're going to need a certain amount of calories. But what the Buddha is teaching you here is not to eat based on emotion, right? If you've ever been sad or angry or frustrated and you turn to some food in order to get to pleasant feelings, this is the mind eating based in craving, desire, attachment, eating based in emotion. And this is just keeping the problem going. Because when the mind's experiencing painful feelings, it will tend to have cravings arise. Because when it has a lack of wisdom, it thinks that, hey, I don't like these painful feelings. And with a lack of wisdom, the only thing the mind knows how to do to get away from those uncomfortable feelings is to crave something and now start latching onto this craving and going to some conditioned pleasant feelings. But if you understand the Four Noble Truths, then you understand this is just keeping the problem going. That when you're experiencing painful feelings, the solution to that isn't to crave something else, because that's just going to keep the problem going, because now you're going to get conditioned pleasant feelings and you're going to start the whole cycle all over again. So this is why when people come home from work, for example, if they've had a hard day at work, they might turn to alcohol or drugs or sex or shopping or gambling or just sitting in front of a TV and mindlessly watching the TV. This is the mind wanting those pleasant feelings, and it's turning to some craving, desire, attachment in order to try to get back to something that's somewhat comfortable. So the Buddha is teaching you here about eating, that it's wise to eat in moderation. And you're going to have to watch this, because some countries, depending on where you live, the portions can be quite large, and you might be used to overeating. And now if you're eating excessively, you might notice that you gorge and your stomach is quite full, and now it puts a lot of strain on the body to be able to digest all that. So the Buddha is explaining that you shouldn't eat food for amusement, meaning to get to those pleasant feelings and just to have some kind of happiness based on amusement, and you shouldn't eat for intoxication, nor just for physical beauty and attractiveness. But instead, the reason why you're eating is to essentially sustain your life. Here, the words he's using is endurance and continuation of this body. That's the reason why you're eating. So if there are certain foods that you don't like and you push them aside, this is because of your craving, desire, attachment, the central desire. Instead, you would like to actually eat those foods. You would like to train your mind that, hey, this food, it's just to nourish the body. So if there are certain fruits or vegetables or some other food that you despise and you try to avoid it like the plague, you should actually put the mind in those situations and gradually start learning to eat that. Because the Buddha teaches you to eliminate this central desire, you're going to need to put the mind in these situations, because what you're actually eating for is just to end the discomfort of the body, where you're trying to ensure that the pain in the stomach that you're experiencing, that is an indication to the mind that, hey, this body needs food. That's what the pain in the stomach is. It's indicating to the mind like, hey, you need to start thinking about finding some food. So the Buddha teaches you that when you're eating in moderation, that you would eat just for the sustaining of your life and just enough food to end the discomfort, rather than continuing to eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. That's what you're not interested in doing. You're not interested in getting these pleasant feelings based on your food, because that's just going to keep the problem going over and over and over again. So there's more to teach here, but I see we have a question. I think Vibhav might have a question here, so go ahead, sir.
Thank you, David. I just had a question about, I think we discussed this before, but maybe good to clarify it, about like things like chocolate and cake are not required. I mean, this is me eaten mostly for amusement more than any need for endurance or continuance of the body, and there might be physical beauty or an attractiveness also associated with it. So
yeah, you're able to eat any and all foods that you like and not be attached to it. There's no harm in eating chocolate, or there's no harm as long as it doesn't have things like caffeine or other things like this in it. Same thing with cakes and desserts. There's no harm in eating these things, and you can eat them without craving, desire, attachment. One of the things that you might need to do is go away from them for a period of time, maybe 3 months or 6 months, where you don't eat any sweets and you train your mind to let go. And then ultimately, you'll be able to start eating these things again, but you're doing it without craving, desire, attachment. This helps you to observe the mind to see if there is any craving, desire, attachment. Whereas if you just continue to eat it, you wouldn't know whether the mind is actually attached to it or not. So it's not about the product or the thing that you eat. It's more so about the method of the mind and how the mind chooses to eat. So it's not about the object. In anything that the Buddha is teaching, he's not teaching about the object, except for maybe like, drugs and alcohol and things like this. But in all these situations, he's talking about what the mind is doing, not about the food itself, the individual object.
I guess something like chocolate, I believe has caffeine. I'm not exactly sure. Because they come from the same cocoa beans, right? And the same thing that makes coffee. I'm not exactly sure, but I can look it up. So you're saying that anything that if he has caffeine or other intoxicants, you should kind of avoid it?
Yes, that's based on the 5 precepts that anything that has caffeine or any kind of stimulants, you should avoid it. But all chocolate doesn't have caffeine in it. If it did, that would be permanence. So there are chocolates out there that doesn't have caffeine. So you can research it and see for yourself so you'll know what does and doesn't have caffeine. There's some cocoa that does have caffeine and there's some that actually doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we have a question from Chrissy here. It has been noticed that the more the mind gets used to being single-minded, it has less ability to multitask. This frustrates some people around me. Do you have any guidance on this? Yes, if other people are getting frustrated, just smile. That's their own frustration. The people around you, if they're trying to push you and motivate you and encourage you to try to do multiple things at one time, that's their craving. And the more that they're trying to push you to do multiple things, slow down even more, right? They're going to get angry, they're going to get frustrated, they're going to get agitated, but eventually they're going to have to eliminate their craving, desire, attachment to you doing things quickly and fast, trying to do multiple things at one time. So oftentimes when I was in situations before where people would get angry or frustrated or agitated with things that I'm doing, I would do that thing even more, because this is like the most loving and kind thing that you can do in order to help them eliminate their craving. And I think you've heard plenty of examples of this, Chrissy, from my life where I've done these kinds of things. So in this situation, you have people around you that are craving for you to do things a certain way. And as long as you keep trying to meet their expectations and do it that way, it's just like feeding the monster. And you just keep feeding the monster, and this monster is going to get bigger and bigger and growl louder and louder when you don't do things their way. So instead, do things the way that you know is wise, and everybody else is just going to have to adjust. You're not causing their anger and their frustration. They're causing it themselves. Okay, here's some more from Chrissy. It is understood that it is the other person's craving for this mind to multitask, but the intention is to not disappoint. You can't disappoint people. If they're experiencing disappointment, that's their discontentedness based on their craving, desire, attachment. The mind with no craving, desire, attachment, it can't be disappointed. So for example, my son, I've never been disappointed in him ever, because I don't have any expectations of wanting and longing, yearning for him to be a certain way. So no matter what he does, I'm never disappointed. I might encourage him to make wiser decisions, but there's no disappointment that arises in the mind because there's no craving or expectations for things to be a certain way. So if people are disappointed around you, that's their discontentedness being caused by their own cravings, desires, attachments. Francis has a question. Does right view also include understanding impermanence and non-self? Yes, right view at its core is the Four Noble Truths, and just understanding the Four Noble Truths. That's what the Buddha points to as right view continuously. But then there's something called accomplishment in view that you learn as part of the retreat that I teach in January, where I help you to get to the first stage of enlightenment through the teachings that I share there. Of course, at the end of the retreat, you won't be at the first stage of enlightenment, but there's right view, which is the Four Noble Truths. But then there's what's called accomplishment in view, where it goes beyond just the Four Noble Truths. And this is the Three Universal Truths. This is understanding the natural law of Gama and several other things. And I recorded this in January when I taught it. So you could actually go back and see this. Or when we get to volume 5 in this program, you're going to see that in volume 5, we're going to cover multiple discourses that includes accomplishment in view. And Chrissy says, thank you. You're welcome. Yeah, not feeding the monsters. Yeah, be sure you're not feeding them. Okay, so now once the Buddha teaches to eat in moderation, the next thing he teaches is to be devoted to wakefulness, right? That you're not just attached to sleeping all the time and holding on to sleep. If you're clinging to sleep and you wake up and you've only slept 7 hours, but you wanted to sleep 9, you'll be grumpy and you'll be irritable. This isn't a biological thing. This is actually the mind craving and clinging to sleep. You can actually go a pretty long time without sleep. I don't necessarily recommend it, but there are going to be situations as you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment where your mind is awakening, and you might go a particular night without sleeping. Or you might sleep very little in a particular night. You might see your sleep schedule becoming erratic. So the Buddha is teaching you to be devoted to wakefulness and not clinging to the sleep. And here he's talking about this watch of the night. I don't know this 100% certainty, but I think what they were doing is that as they were sleeping out in the wilderness, they would have people that were wake up and basically kind of keep watch, because there was lots of animals, way more than nowadays, and there wasn't as many humans, and these animals could potentially attack the humans. So I think what they would do is they would have people kind of almost like a military, kind of watching over and making sure they scared away any animals that might be coming, because they would be out in the middle of fields and parks, and they would be in the forest, and these animals would potentially be coming to snack on them at nighttime. So I think what the Buddha is talking about here is that when you're waking up, the first watch of the night, the middle watch of the night, the last watch of the night, being sure that you have mindfulness and awareness of mind, and you're devoted to wakefulness, that you're not groggy and irritable because you didn't get a certain amount of sleep. And that's what he's talking about here. And you can also relate this, and I think he's going to talk about this here in a moment, that you have awareness of mind as you ease off into sleep and as you're waking up, because your thoughts can invade you. As you're going to sleep at night, you might notice that you have these repetitive or obsessive thoughts, or something that you've done in that particular day or other days. Those thoughts might come and invade you as you're falling asleep, and it makes it difficult for you to sleep. So you need to be watchful over the mind as you're falling asleep and as you're waking up. And I think that's what he's going to start talking about here with mindfulness, that you're going to need to ensure that you have this awareness of mind at all times during your day. Here he's giving you different actions that you might be participating in. And essentially what he's talking about is having full awareness of the mind no matter what you're doing. So if you're driving, or you're walking down the street, or you're doing any particular thing in your day-to-day life, he's teaching you to have awareness of mind. And here he's talking about a monk's life, right? Like carrying your outer robe in your bowl, eating, drinking, consuming food, tasting, all these different things, urinating, defecating, standing, walking, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, talking, and keeping silent. He's saying, okay, make sure you have this mindfulness and awareness of mind, because if you're going to purify your mind, you need to be able to see even the slightest unwholesome thought trying to enter into the mind. You need to be able to be aware of that and cut it off and let it go. And of course, that takes time to build up to that point where you can do that. And that's where your meditation is coming in. The breathing mindfulness meditation is helping you to be able to do that. But ultimately, you would like to cultivate the mindfulness and meditation, and then in your day-to-day life, be able to practice mindfulness at all times during the day. Then, after he taught that, he would teach his ordained practitioners to then go to a secluded place, right? So after monks would train with him for 6 months, a year, 2 years, after they developed a certain amount of awareness of mind and all those other things that we were talking about, he would teach them to go out alone and live by themselves, because your mind needs to get used to being alone. Today, you wouldn't be able to probably go off in the woods and live for 3 months or 6 months by yourself, particularly as a household practitioner. So what you do is you do this in little spurts, that maybe you go to the movies alone, maybe like a 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. You go out by yourself shopping or to the movies, or maybe you take yourself on a holiday. Maybe you go on holiday for a week or two by yourself. And you would like to get to the point where you're completely comfortable being alone. Some people, they always want to be with others. And then when they're alone and they're dealing with their own thoughts, they have a lot of difficulties with that. Some people just really want to be alone and they don't like to be with other people. So you're going to need to train the mind to be able to do both of these things, where you're comfortable with people and you're comfortable without people, because these things are all impermanent. But if your mind is clinging and craving to always be around people, when you're alone, you'll be lonely or bored, or you'll struggle. Or if you're craving and clinging to be alone, when you're with people, you'll actually struggle during those experiences. So you'd like to put the mind in these different situations so that you can train the mind to be comfortable and content during those periods of time. Then what he's talking about next is what's called the 5 hindrances. I've taught these at different times in our group learning program. At the very last class, if you took the group learning program, I teach you about the 5 hindrances. These are the 5 things that are going to stop you from getting to enlightenment. So here the Buddha is saying, okay, once you go out into the forest by yourself and you learn to be alone, you need to really start focusing on the 5 hindrances of central desire, ill will, complacency, restlessness and worry, and doubt. And if you haven't learned what these are, you can go back to the group learning program because that's been recorded many times, and you can learn about the 5 hindrances. And here he's talking about those 5 hindrances here. Okay. And now what he's talking about is, okay, now that the mind is starting to eliminate these things, it's going to start moving into the jhanas. He's starting to now say, okay, with the 5 hindrances abandoned, now the mind's going to start moving into the jhanas. And the jhanas are these 4 preliminary phases that the mind goes through before it gets to the first stage of enlightenment. And I've also taught these in the group learning program. And I teach them in the retreat that I teach in January. I also teach them in the course where I teach experiencing the jhanas and the 4 stages of enlightenment. And I also teach it in the retreat coming up in August from the 18th through, I think it's the 23rd, that retreat's going to be happening. So I'm not going to have time to teach that here, but understand that the jhanas are preliminary phases that the mind starts to move through before it gets to the first stage of enlightenment. And this is experienced based on having put together all those teachings that we've been talking about here, which includes the Eightfold Path. And now the Buddha says, okay, having done those things, now the mind is starting to experience this peacefulness. And ultimately, that's what's going to lead to enlightenment itself. And when you get to enlightenment, you have what's called final knowledge or final wisdom, where you completely understand the entire path to enlightenment. And now you're practicing it effortlessly. On the way to enlightenment, it's quite a struggle and quite a challenge in certain times to get the mind to do what it is that intellectually you know that it should do. The path to enlightenment isn't easy, but it's not difficult either, but there's certainly challenges and struggles along the way. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you've now attained what's called final knowledge, that you fully understand the entire path to enlightenment. The way that I think about it is it's like upgrading the operating system of your computer. This old archaic operating system, you kind of stumble with it. It's not, so readily available and able to function with it. And when you upgrade to this new operating system in these iterative upgrades, each time you're upgrading your operating system, you have to figure out where things are. In the first 2 or 3 weeks that you're maybe using that new operating system, it's kind of cumbersome and it's kind of challenging because you got to figure out how to do all the things that you know you need to do, but maybe they've moved the applications around in different places. But ultimately, once you get up and running on that new operating system, it's effortless. It's like, oh, thank goodness, this is so much easier than the old system. So the same thing is true as this old archaic operating system of unenlightened 1.0. The mind is really struggling there and having all this discontentedness, but also upgrading to enlightenment 9.0. That's a challenge, and it feels like a real struggle sometimes making your way to that. But once you get to enlightenment, it's like upgrading the mind, that now everything's effortless because the mind has attained final knowledge, that you fully understand the entire path to enlightenment. And the Buddha is talking about here that one has laid down the burden. What he's talking about here is laying down craving, desire, attachment. You'll see in other teachings where he refers to craving, desire, attachment as a burden. This is where if you're carrying craving, desire, attachment around, it's like having heavy weights on your shoulders. If you come home from work and you're just like, oh my goodness, you feel so heavy and bogged down, this is because the mind's carrying around all this craving. But when you train your mind to let go of craving, desire, attachment, it's like laying down the burden. You no longer are carrying this around, and the mind feels light. The body feels light. Everything's tranquil. The mind is tranquil and the body is tranquil because you've reached the true goal. You destroyed the 10 fetters, and now the mind is completely liberated and having attained final knowledge. But here the Buddha leaves off with moving through the jhanas, but then from the jhanas, there's 4 stages of enlightenment that the mind goes through. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Remember, you can put it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any questions that you like. All right, I see a question here from Vibhav. Is there any significance of the lion's pose? This is the position that the Buddha laid in during his life in order to sleep, where you're on your right side and your hand and your arm is kind of stacked on your body, your legs are stacked, and he would put his right foot over his left, and that's how he would sleep. You can sleep in that way. I noticed that I tend to sleep better in that position. And I don't know if it's because the way the organs are, that maybe the heart and the lungs or the stomach is in a certain position. I've seen things online with modern science that they also recommend to sleep in that way. But if it doesn't feel natural to you and it doesn't feel comfortable for you, not everybody is going to sleep in that particular pose. But I do notice that I sleep better in that particular position. But I've trained my mind to also be able to sleep in other positions too. So if you would like to try that, you can certainly try it and see how it works for you. But if it doesn't feel comfortable and you're not interested in it, then just leave it to the side. Typically, if you do something for the first time, the mind doesn't like it. I didn't realize, but for a long time I used to sleep in that position. And then when I started learning the teachings of the Buddha, I was like, oh wow, the Buddha sleeps in this position too. So I was already doing it before I even studied that the Buddha was actually doing it. And then I realized how much easier it was to fall asleep and actually get a really nice sleep. The body and the mind feel more comfortable in that position. But I can also sleep in other positions as well. So you might decide that you'd like to try that yourself. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So let's move to the next chapter. If there's someone who would like to volunteer to read this one. Here you can see all the words that I'm sharing with you to help you guys. And here I've linked in the 5 hindrances. So you can click on this from the ebook and actually go to a discussion on the 5 hindrances if you like. And there's the 5 hindrances in the words of the Buddha and some more content from me. All right, so now we're on chapter 26. It looks like Keely is going to volunteer. Go ahead, ma'am.
Simile of a young infant. Suppose a young infant boy, unwise, lying on his back, were to put a stick or pebble in his mouth because of his nurse's lack of attention. His nurse would quickly attend to him and try to take it out. If she could not quickly take it out, she would brace the boy's head with her left hand, and hooking a finger of her right hand, she would take it out even if she had to draw blood. For what reason? There would be some distress for the boy. This I don't deny, but the nurse has to do so for his good and welfare. Out of compassion for him, however, when the boy has grown up and has enough sense, the nurse would be unconcerned about him, thinking, the boy can now look after himself, he won't be careless. So too, so long as a monk is still not accomplished in confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities, in the sense of moral wrongdoing in cultivating wholesome qualities, in moral concern in cultivating wholesome qualities, in energy in cultivating wholesome qualities, and in wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities, I must still look after him. But when that monk is accomplished in confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities, in the sense of moral wrongdoing in cultivating wholesome qualities, in moral concern in cultivating wholesome qualities, in energy in cultivating wholesome qualities, and in wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities, then I am unconcerned about him, thinking, the monk can now look after himself, he won't be careless.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So here the Buddha is describing this relationship that he had with his students and relating it to this nurse looking after an infant. That oftentimes the students of the Buddha would come to him almost like a stepfather, that some of them would come as early as 5, 6, 7 years old. Some of them would come at other times during their life in different ages, and they would basically come to the Buddha, and he would essentially adopt them almost like a father, right? That he would be taking care of them and educating them on many different things. And much like a young infant child, if it was choking on something or had something in its mouth, how a nurse would really attend to it and help to get that out. The Buddha is saying the same thing is true for him with his students, that if they're not accomplished in these 5 faculties of confidence, of moral wrongdoing, of moral concern, of energy and wisdom, that he has to look after them with more care and more attention. But once they've accomplished these things and they've actually developed them, he doesn't pay attention to them as much because they now have enough development on their own. They can kind of go off on their own. So these different qualities, when he's talking here about confidence, what he's talking about here is cultivating confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, and the community, working to eliminate the doubt and cultivating wholesome qualities in the mind. And then moral wrongdoing, what this is cultivating the quality to know what's wise and what's unwise. This is developing your wisdom of the natural law of Gama. What moral concern is once you've developed moral wrongdoing, that you know what's wise and unwise, moral concern is that you have concern to not do unwise things, that you're not interested in causing harm to others. So if you are starting to understand what is wise and unwise, and you're disinterested in causing harm to others, and you're only interested in practicing wise decision making, this is moral concern. Sometimes if moral concern isn't in the middle, when you do something unwise, you might feel guilty or shameful. And that's because the mind is on one side of this, and you're not actually in the middle with your moral concern. But if you're on the other side of this, you would care less about how your decisions impacted other people. And you might have been at that point in other times of your life where you could care less. So you got to be aware that the mind's going to swing like this, where you might get to the point where you just don't care how your decisions impact others. But you might also have this other side where the mind's craving and holding on and feeling guilty and shameful with the slightest little thing that you do that is unwise. And you would like to bring this to the middle where you don't feel that guilt and shame, but instead you just have this concern that you're interested in not causing harm to others. So the moral wrongdoing is knowing what's wise and unwise. The moral concern is having the concern to not do unwise things and only make wise decisions. What energy is this is like having ambition, enthusiasm, motivation, that you're going to need to do that. This is the opposite of complacency. So you're going to need to develop this energy to cultivate wholesome qualities where you have ambition, motivation, and enthusiasm to cultivate the mind. And then, of course, wisdom is the opposite of the unknowing of true reality. This is where you independently verify the truth through learning, through reflecting to independently verify the teachings, and then through practicing. And the Buddha is saying, okay, once somebody's cultivated these 5, I think he refers to them as spiritual faculties in other discourses. Once someone's developed these 5, okay, it's kind of like he can step back a little bit. He doesn't need to kind of watch over them as much because they now have these 5 things which are going to help you and encourage you along the path. So if you don't yet have these 5 things, it's important for you to develop them so that you can have confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, and your own ability to attain enlightenment, that you have this moral wrongdoing where you understand what's wise and unwise, that you have concern, this moral concern that you're not interested in causing harm to others, that you have motivation, enthusiasm, ambition to cultivate wholesome qualities, and you have the wisdom to understand how to cultivate these wholesome qualities. So once you get accomplished in these things, now that will propel you further and further on the path to enlightenment. So any questions on this chapter? Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, I don't see any questions on this chapter. It looks like Brent has a question from the other chapter. He says, should a practitioner be able to recall jhana states, go back to them at will? So as the mind has put together the Eightfold Path and the mind's moving into these jhanas, the mind actually resides in these jhanas. It doesn't move in and out of the jhanas. Unless you make your way into the jhanas and then you become complacent, the mind will regress out of it. But if you move into, say, the first, second, third, or fourth jhana, and now say you're in the first stage of enlightenment, those qualities that you cultivated as the mind was moving through the jhanas, those continue in the mind. This is one of the big misunderstandings in the world about the jhanas. People think you kind of turn them on and turn them off, or that you only experience them when you're in meditation. But in reality, these are qualities that the mind is cultivating in your journey towards the first stage of enlightenment. And as you move through the jhanas and ultimately into the first stage of enlightenment, the mind is consistently experiencing these qualities. So when you see the Buddha describing the qualities of the jhanas, if your mind is in the jhana, you will be experiencing those qualities all throughout your day, not just during meditation. It's not something that you turn on and turn off. The qualities are just always there. And those qualities continue with you all the way through to enlightenment, because you're going to need those qualities in order to fully purify the mind. So for example, in the second jhana, the Buddha talks about unification of the mind, or oneness of mind, where there's no longer a conscious mind and a subconscious mind, that you now have full awareness of the entire mind. This isn't something that you turn on or turn off. It's just a quality of the mind that you've now developed that stays with you all the way through to enlightenment. Looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, David. Can you briefly explain the conscious and subconscious mind, the differences between them, and what is and what happens when there's unification?
Sure. So the conscious mind is what you're currently aware of, and that's only a certain portion of the mind. And it's polluted, and you may have awareness of that mind to a certain degree. As you develop your mindfulness more and more, not only will you have awareness of the conscious mind, but the subconscious mind now dissolves, that you now have full awareness of the entire mind. The subconscious mind is actually more heavily polluted, but when there is a conscious mind and a subconscious mind, you only have marginal awareness of the conscious mind, and you have no awareness of the subconscious mind whatsoever. And because the subconscious mind is more polluted than even the conscious mind, the subconscious mind oftentimes throws kind of unwholesome things into the conscious mind. So if you've ever been sitting with a group of people or standing at the water cooler and talking with friends, and you just kind of blurted something out that was kind of like inappropriate, it's not even something you thought about, it's not even something you've ever considered, and your mind doesn't even think that way typically, you just kind of blurted it out and you're like, that was silly of me, like why did I say that? That's your subconscious mind, the polluted mind throwing something up into the conscious mind, and now you just kind of blurt it out. But by the time you get to this unification of the mind, you now can see the entire mind. And this is where you start realizing that, oh my goodness, it's so polluted. And that's what you need in order to be able to fully purify the mind. That you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment if there was a conscious mind and then there was a subconscious mind that you didn't have awareness of. You wouldn't be able to purify it if you didn't have awareness of it. So by the time you get to that second jhana, where you fully are aware of the entire mind, there isn't this random thoughts that just keep peering into your mind from erroneous places like the subconscious mind that is just throwing things up into your mind, but instead you have this full awareness of the entire mind.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so now let's go to chapter 27. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Vilhava, I'm not sure. Okay, there we go, Brent. All right, go ahead, Brent.
Killing in the perfectly enlightened one's teachings. Cassie, you are well known to be a horse trainer. Just how do you guide a horse to be tamed? Venerable sir, I guide one kind of horse gently, another kind sternly, and still another kind both gently and sternly. But Cassie, if a horse to be tamed by you won't submit to guidance by any of these methods, how do you deal with him? Venerable sir, if a horse to be tamed by me won't submit to guidance by any of these methods, then I kill him. For what reason? So that there will be no disgrace to my teaching organization. But, Venerable Sir, the perfectly enlightened one is the unsurpassed trainer of persons to be tamed. Just how does the perfectly enlightened one guide a person to be tamed? I guide one kind of person gently, another kind sternly, and still another kind both gently and sternly. This, Cassie, is the gentle method. Such is bodily wholesome conduct, such the result of bodily wholesome conduct, such is verbal wholesome conduct, such the result of verbal wholesome conduct. Such is mental wholesome conduct. Such the result of mental wholesome conduct. Such are the heavenly beings. Such are human beings. This is the stern method. Such is bodily misconduct. Such the result of bodily misconduct. Such is verbal misconduct. Such the result of verbal misconduct. Such is mental misconduct. Such the result of mental misconduct. Such is hell. Such the animal realm. Such the realm of afflicted spirits. This is the gentle and stern method. Such is bodily wholesome conduct. Such the result of bodily wholesome conduct. Such is bodily misconduct. Such the result of bodily misconduct. Such is verbal wholesome conduct. Such the result of verbal wholesome conduct. Such is verbal conduct. Such the result of verbal misconduct. Such is mental wholesome conduct. Such the result of mental wholesome conduct. Such is mental misconduct. Such the result of mental misconduct. Such are the heavenly beings, such are human beings, such is hell, such the animal realm, such the realm of afflicted spirits. But Venerable Sir, if a person to be tamed by you won't submit to guidance by any of these methods, how does the perfectly enlightened one deal with him? If a person to be tamed by me won't submit to guidance by any of these methods, then I kill him. But Venerable Sir, isn't it allowable for the perfectly enlightened one to destroy life, yet he says, then I kill him? It is true, Kessi, that it isn't allowable for the Tathagata to destroy life. However, when a person to be tamed won't submit to guidance by the gentle method, the stern method, or the method that is both gentle and stern, then the Tathagata thinks he should not be spoken to and instructed, and his wise fellow monks too think he should not be spoken to and instructed. For this, Kessi, is killing in the Noble One's teachings. The Tathagata thinks one should not be spoken to and instructed, and one's wise fellow monks, too, think one should not be spoken to and instructed.
Okay, thank you, Brent. So here the Buddha is relating once again his method of teaching to that of training a horse, because a horse can be somewhat wild and so can the unenlightened mind. And he's talking about this gentle method, this stern method, and this gentle and stern method. And he's describing what that is for him and how he actually does this. Now, when you teach or you share teachings with people, if you're a teacher like the Buddha sharing these teachings, nowadays we pretty much teach in the gentle method, where we speak in ways that is very gentle. There's only one person and kind of like a little bit of another person that I will sometimes talk a little bit more sternly with. But talking stern doesn't mean talking harsh, because remember, right speech, you're not interested in speaking harsh. What the stern method is, in terms of the way we practice it nowadays, is you firm up your voice a little bit. Right? Where the gentle method, it's like to my son. This is the one person who I will teach the stern method to every once in a while. And there's no one else in the world except for in the past. I used to help his mom every once in a while. I'd have to be a little bit more firm. With the gentle method, it might be Bailan. You got to stop this lying. You shouldn't be lying. It's really unwise to lie, right? I'm speaking a little bit more gentle to him. But then after having that discussion 5, 6, 8, 10 times, then eventually it's like, Bailan, you really need to stop lying. This isn't helping you whatsoever. It's only going to lead to unwholesome results for you. Right? So this is like a little bit more firm that I'm talking with him, but it's still speaking the same thing with the 5 factors of well-spoken speech and not using the harshness. There's no anger behind it. It's just firming up the speech a little bit. Right? And I used to do this with my wife a little bit. I didn't talk to her about lying because she didn't lie, but certain things that she would have trouble with, I needed to firm up my speech a little bit so she would understand how serious it is. And then there's this gentle and stern method. So you might use the gentle method of talking with everybody and anybody in your life. But if you have children, you might need to be a little bit firm a little bit in your tone and your tempo. The word choices are the same. It's just the tone and tempo is a little bit more firmed up. But there's no anger behind it. You're not interested in ever talking with anger. So if you need to go away and calm down before you come talk with your children, you might decide to be a little bit more firm with them. But as your mind becomes more awake, even in the present moment, you can be firm with them without any anger behind it because you're not attached to them. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, he would teach gentle, stern, and gentle and stern, because remember, he's living with his students. They're basically like children. And then if they didn't do the things that he described in the way that he taught them, he killed them, right? And then the horse trainer is like, hold on a second, you can't kill your students. What do you mean you kill your students? He's like, yeah, you're right, I can't destroy life, but essentially I just stopped teaching them. And that's essentially like killing them, because a Buddha is interested in ensuring that as many people get to enlightenment during their lifetime as possible. And they're going to teach, and they're going to be patient, and they're going to be calm, and they're going to be trying to help their students as much as possible. But even a Buddha, if they have a student who's not really being respectful and not really attending to the teachings and really looking to understand them and really practice them in a way that would be helpful, he's just wasting his time when other people could actually benefit from his time. So in this situation, the Buddha just chooses not to teach this person, not out of anger, not out of hostility, not because he doesn't love this person, not because he doesn't have compassion for them, but it's just not a good use of his time. A Buddha, an enlightened being, is going to use their time wisely. And if spending time with someone who isn't heeding their advice and isn't heeding his guidance and isn't actually trying to make efforts to improve, then it's better for him to just move on and actually teach someone else. So that's why he's saying he just stops teaching this person. So any questions here on this particular chapter? This is chapter 27. Okay, we have a question from Francis. Are there any other training for developing oneness of mind other than breathing mindfulness meditation? There's breathing mindfulness meditation and then practicing in day-to-day life to only do one thing at a time. That's how you develop singleness of mind. You need the meditation because you're focusing on the breath, but then in your day-to-day life, wherever you see your mind wandering, you need to be able to cut that off and let it go, and don't allow the mind to rapidly cycle from thing to thing to thing. That's the two trainings that you're doing in order to develop singleness of mind and concentration. Okay. You're welcome, Francis. All right, so now we go to chapter 28. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, it looks like I'll go ahead and let Keely read this one, Brent, and then maybe if we need some more, we'll come back to you.
The Tathagata is the one who shows the way. The Brahmin Ganaka Mongoliana asked the perfectly enlightened one, when Master Gotama disciples are thus advised and instructed by him, do they all attain Nibbana enlightenment, the ultimate goal, or do some not attain it? When Brahman, they are thus advised and instructed by me. Some of my disciples attain Nibbana enlightenment, the ultimate goal, and some do not attain it. Master Gotama, since Nibbana enlightenment exists and the path leading to Nibbana exists and Master Gotama is present as the guide, what is the cause and reason why? When Master Gotama's disciples are thus advised and instructed by him, some of them attain Nibbana, the ultimate goal, and some do not attain it. As to that, Brahman, I will ask you a question in return. Answer it as you choose. What do you think, Brahman? Are you familiar with the road leading to Rajagaha? Yes, Master Gotama, I'm familiar with the road leading to Rajagaha. What do you think, Brahman? Suppose a man came who wanted to go to Rajagaha, and he approached you and said, Venerable Sir, I want to go to Rajagaha. Show me the road to Rajagaha. Then you told him, now, good man, this road goes to Rajagaha. Follow it for a while, and you will see a certain village. Go a little further, and you will see a certain town. Go a little further, and you will see a Rajagaha with its lovely parks, groves, meadows, and ponds. Then, having been thus advised and instructed by you, he would take a wrong road and would go to the west. Then a second man came who wanted to go to Rajagaha, and he approached you and said, Venerable Sir, I want to go to Rajagaha. Then you told him, Now, good man, this road goes to Rajagaha. Follow it for a while, and you will see a certain village. Go a little further, and you will see a certain town. Go a little further, and you will see Rajagaha with its lovely parks, groves, meadows, and ponds. As advised and instructed by you, he will arrive safely in Rajagaha. Now, Brahman, since Rajagaha is it and the path leading to Rajagaha is it, and you are present.
I think we might have lost you.
As the guide, what is the when those men who have been thus advised and instructed by you, one man takes a wrong road and goes to the west, the one arrives safely in Rajagaha. What can I do about that, Master Gotama? I am one who shows the way. So too, Brahman, Nibbana's enlightenment is its, and the path leading to Nibbana is its, and I am present as the guide. Yet when my disciples have been thus advised and instructed by me, some of them attain Nibbana, the ultimate goal, and some do not attain it. What can I do about it? Brahman, the Tathagata is one who shows the way.
Okay, thank you very much. So here, essentially, you might think anybody who studies with a Buddha would surely get to enlightenment, right? Everybody should get to enlightenment. Well, that's permanence. Not everybody who studies with the Buddha gets to enlightenment, because when students are coming, they have different levels of pollution in their mind to start out with. They have a certain amount of determination, dedication, and diligence on the path. They might heed the advice and learn from the teacher in one way or another. And some people get to enlightenment and some people don't, even studying with an actual Buddha. And the Buddha uses this analogy in this story to be able to help this person, because the Brahmin is confused, like, hold on a second, you're essentially a Buddha. Like, why is it that some people get to enlightenment and some people don't? So one of the ways that the Buddha would oftentimes teach people is he would ask them questions, because then by him asking them questions and them replying to the questions, he could teach them through the wisdom that they already have. And that's what he did here, is he used the wisdom that the person already has about traveling on a road to a certain town. And even though you give the exact same instructions to each individual traveler, one traveler gets lost and one traveler arrives to the town as described. But the instructions were exactly the same. So the Buddha is explaining this in the same way that he gives the instructions similarly to each individual student, and some are going to get to enlightenment and some aren't. And it's not because of the instruction or the Buddha himself. It's about the level of pollution in a student's mind. It's about the determination, dedication, and diligence that a particular student has to apply the teachings in their day-to-day life. So here the Buddha is helping you to be able to understand that not even everybody gets to enlightenment who studies with him. So any questions here, you guys can let me know by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Looks like Helena has a question. Regarding singleness of mind, what do you usually do on your international trips, Teacher David? I mean, while at the airport on a plane. One thing at a time. If I'm standing in line, I'm just standing in line and focused on standing in line. And now when I'm up to the front of the line, I'm looking for the person who's going to see me at the ticket counter. And now someone calls me over. My goal is just to walk to the ticket counter. That's it. That's all I'm thinking about, is walking safely to the ticket counter and not actually harming anybody around me. Now I arrive to the ticket counter. Now it's okay, passport, right? All I'm thinking about is just hand over my passport. And now I'm just standing there watching the person, not thinking about anything, just watching the person handle the passport. And now whatever questions they ask, I'm just going to answer it truthfully and just doing one thing at a time, just single-threadedly like that. And when I'm at the ticket counter, I'm not looking behind me. I'm not looking to the side of me. I'm not checking and fumbling with my bags. I'm not doing this and doing that. Just one thing at a time. And you'll see that you're actually more successful and you're actually able to do things more readily. Sometimes we think by doing multiple things, or at least attempting to do multiple things and hurrying up and going through things, you think that you're actually more productive, but you'll fumble, you'll fall, you'll make mistakes, you'll do things with errors. But if you just do one thing at a time, single single-threadedly, you'll see that you're actually more successful and you can handle things very well this way. Okay, so that's the way that I would do it as traveling or any other things that I do. And this is what hones your mind to have that focus and concentration, where even in a 2-hour class like this, you can just be focused. And that's one of the things, going back to Francis's question, that you guys are doing each week in order to train your mind to be able to listen in this class and pay attention for 2 hours or an hour and a half. That takes a certain amount of focus and clarity. So your breathing mindfulness meditation and focusing your mind with singleness of mind, that's what you're actually doing. And while you're in a class like this, you're actually doing that. You're training your mind to just focus on one thing at a time. And now when you go out in other parts of your life, you like to do exactly the same thing. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else. So let's move to the next chapter, which is chapter 29. Is there someone who would like to read this one? I saw Brent in Vibhav earlier. Okay, Brent. Oh, there's Vibhav. We'll let Vibhav have another try since you've read a few there, Brent. And maybe, Brent, you can take the last one, number 30.
The simile of the great log. Do you see, monks, the great log being carried along by the current of the river Ganges? Yes, Venerable Sir. If, monks, that log does not veer towards the near shore, does not veer towards the far shore, does not sink in midstream, does not get cast up on high ground, does not get caught by human beings, does not get caught by non-human beings, does not get caught in a whirlpool, and does not become inwardly rotten, it will slant, slope, and incline towards the ocean. For what reason? Because the current of the river Ganges slants, slopes, and inclines towards the ocean. So too, monks, if you do not veer towards the near shore, do not veer towards the far shore, do not sink in midstream, do not get cast up on the high ground, do not get caught by human beings, do not get caught by non-human beings, do not get caught in a whirlpool, and do not become inwardly rotten, you will slant, slope, and incline towards Nibbana, enlightenment. For what reason? Because right view slants, slopes, and inclines towards Nibbana, enlightenment. And when this was said, a certain monk asked the perfectly enlightened one, "What, Venerable Sir, is the near shore? What is the far shore? What is sinking in midstream? What is getting cast up on high ground? What is getting caught by human beings, and what is getting caught by non-human beings? What is getting caught in a whirlpool? What is inward rottenness?" The near shore, monk, this is the designation for the 6 internal sense spaces. The far shore, this is a designation for the 6 external sense spaces. Sinking in midstream, this is a designation for excitement and desire. Getting cast upon high ground, this is a designation for the conceit, I am. And what monk is getting caught up by human beings? Here, someone lives in association with household practitioners. He rejoices with them and sorrows with them. He is happy when they are happy and sad when they are sad. And he involves himself in their affairs and duties. This is called getting caught up by human beings. And what monk is getting caught up by non-human beings? Here, someone lives the holy life, the desire to be reborn into a certain order of heavenly beings, thinking, by this virtue or vow or austerity or holy life, I will become a heavenly being or one among the heavenly beings. This is called getting caught by non-human beings. Getting caught in a whirlpool, this monk, is a designation for the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. And what monk is inward rottenness? Here someone is immoral, one of unwholesome character, of impure and suspect behavior, secretive in his acts, no ascetic, though claiming to be one, not a celibate, though claiming to be one, inwardly rotten, corrupt, wicked. This is called inward rottenness.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. This chapter shows up at some other places in the book series, and what I'm going to do is wait until we get there because I can go through it and speak very thoroughly about this, where today, just looking at the time, we've spent some time on some other discourses. What I'm going to do is just open up to any questions that you guys might have on this one. If you've studied it before class, then maybe you have some questions, so I'll go ahead and answer those. But if not, if there's no questions, I'm just going to move on to the next discourse because I'll describe this one in detail when we get to it in the future in another book, because this one shows up a couple of times in the book series. So if you have questions, just let me know. Okay, Vibhav, if you have a question, go ahead, sir.
You had a question about the near shore, and there's, I think, one other one which talks about the central bases.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so in the near shore, it says 6 internal bases. And then I think there was the one other one which says
Yeah,
5 chords of getting caught in a whirlpool, designation of for the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. So what is the difference between the 6 internal bases here and the 5 chords of sensual pleasure?
Sure. So what the internal sense bases are, this is the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind itself. The external sense base, this is the thing that the eye sees. So the form is the external sense base. The sound is the external sense base. The odor is the external sense base. The flavor is the external sense base. The physical object is the external sense base. And then the mental object. So the internal sense base is like the organs itself, and the external sense base is the object that the mind is coming in contact with. Then when you have the 5 chords of central pleasure, what the 5 chords are is that's how the mind, with the 6 internal sense bases, the mind is now longing and yearning for the external sense bases. And the Buddha talks about the 5 chords because it's the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the body. So the chord is like the connection between the internal sense base and the external sense base, the object, the longing, yearning for the object. That's the chord that the Buddha talks about.
Thank you. And why is the mind not associated in the chord basis? Because there's a connection between the mind and the mental object, right?
Yeah, because it's already there. It's already inside the mind itself.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Okay, let me see. I think that's all the questions here. So like I mentioned, I'll go through this in a lot of detail when we get to it in a future class, when we'll have more time. And you can see here that I've gone through it in detail in the book, so you guys can read this. If you haven't already read it, it'll help you to understand it. But then if you have questions, let me know. And then here's number 30. Brent, if you would like to go ahead and read that one, you're welcome to.
Sure. The simile of the tortoise. Monks, in the past a tortoise was searching for food along the bank of a river one evening. On that same evening, a jackal was also searching for food along the bank of that same river. When the tortoise saw the jackal in the distance searching for food, it drew its limbs and neck inside its shell and passed the time keeping still and silent. The jackal had also seen the tortoise in the distance searching for food, so he approached and waited close by, thinking, when this tortoise extends one or another of its limbs or its neck, I will grab it right on the spot, pull it out, and eat it. But because the tortoise did not extend any of its limbs or its neck, the jackal, failing to gain access to it, lost interest in it and departed. So too, monks, Mara, the evil one, is constantly and continually waiting close by you, thinking, perhaps I will gain access to him through the eye, or through the ear, or through the nose, or through the tongue, or through the body, or through the mind. Therefore, monks, reside guarding the doors of the 6 sense bases, having seen a form with the eye, having heard a sound with the ear, having smelt an odor with the nose, having tasted a flavor with the tongue, having touched a physical object with the body, having recognized a mental object with the mind, do not grasp its signs and features. Since, if you leave the eye sense space unguarded, the ear sense space unguarded, the nose sense space unguarded, the tongue sense space unguarded, the body sense space unguarded, the mind sense space unguarded, evil, unwholesome states of craving and displeasure might invade you. Practice the way of its restraint. Guard the eye sense space, the ear sense space, the nose sense space, the tongue sense space, the body sense space, the mind sense space. Undertake the restraint of the eye sense space, the ear sense space, the nose sense space, the tongue sense space, the body sense space, and the mind sense space. When, monks, you reside guarding the doors of the 6 sense bases, Mara, the evil one, failing to gain access to you, will lose interest in you and depart, just as the jackal departed from the tortoise. Drawing in the mind's thoughts as a tortoise draws its limbs into its shell, independent, not harassing others, fully extinguished, a monk would not blame anyone.
Okay, thank you, Brent. This is also another discourse that shows up in multiple places within the book series, and I'm going to walk you through and understand it at a different time. But if you have questions on this, I'll answer them for you here and help you to understand whatever it is that you have questions about. But then in terms of going through it thoroughly, like I do with these typical discourses, I'm going to reserve that for a future time when we have more time to walk through it and really give it its due justice to be able to understand it, because there's a lot of things going on here in this discourse, as is the previous one. I see Helena has a question here, so feel free to ask any questions you guys like. What does Mara gain from causing calamity? What's his motivation? Craving, desire, attachment, longing, yearning, wanting things to be unwholesome. That's the motivation. That's the craving, the longing, the yearning that's motivating that unwise decisions and the unskillful conduct. And then when the mind gets what it wants, gets pleasant feelings. So the more calamity that is in the world, the more Mara appreciates that and likes that and revels in that. But then when Mara doesn't get what he wants, then that's where the anger comes in. And where all this is coming from is the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality, the lack of wisdom. So these formless beings have a different existence than us, but they have the same challenges with the unenlightened mind, having craving, desire, attachment, anger, hatred, ill will, that ignorance or unknowing of true reality. Those same three poisons of craving, anger, and ignorance are affected by every being in existence, whether it's a hell being, an animal, an afflicted spirit, a human being, or a heavenly being. It's only once the mind gets to enlightenment that those don't exist any longer. So anytime you see anything unwholesome in the world, it's always coming from craving, anger, and ignorance. And you can see this and independently verify it. So even these beings are experiencing the same exact challenges and difficulties. So Mara gets pleasure when his craving is fulfilled, which is he wants to cause calamity and unwholesome things in the world. And he's doing a pretty good job at it. Okay, so let's see. We have a question here from Samantha. Is the Mara a form of the devil we are taught in other religions? Yes, the Buddha refers to this formless being that is interested in causing calamity in the world as Mara. And you might have heard this being referred to as the devil or Satan or Lucifer. This is an actual real being that you may end up coming in contact with at some point, or beings working on Mara's behalf. And Mara is only interested in causing calamity and difficulties in the world. And like I mentioned, Mara's doing a pretty good job at it. Mara can't cause those things himself, but he can influence other beings to do these things on his behalf. So if somebody makes an unwise decision, that's a decision that they're making. If their mind's polluted and lacking wisdom, then Mara can easily influence you. And that's what the Buddha is talking about here with the simile of the tortoise, that if you extend your sense bases, if you're longing, yearning, like the turtle extending its limbs, then Mara can easily gain access to the mind and now influence you. But if you don't do that, if you withdraw like the tortoise, then Mara can't get access to you. And Mara loses interest in you and goes away from you. So Mara will influence you, or I should say attempt to influence you, all the way up to the first jhana. And now getting into the first jhana, Mara knows that your mind is wise enough and you're protecting and guarding the mind, that Mara won't try to influence you any longer, because Mara loses interest in you like the jackal here and goes away. But up until that time, Mara and beings on Mara's behalf will constantly try to influence you. So if you are interested in getting to the path to enlightenment, don't be surprised if you start getting all these influences to do unwholesome things from the people around you, because the darkness is going to try to hold on to you and keep you down. This is what Mara does and beings working on Mara's behalf. The last thing others are interested in is somebody ascending to enlightenment. People who are in the darkness, you know the old saying of misery loves company? It's true that when people are in the darkness, they're going to try to pull you down and pull you down. And this is where that moral wrongdoing needs to come in, and the moral concern, and you don't cling to these relationships and stay in the darkness. Okay, Helena has a question here. Who are the beings working on Mara's behalf? These are human beings that have been influenced repetitively by Mara and that have extensive amounts of craving, anger, and ignorance. And afflicted spirits are also functioning based on influence from Mara. And some animals are also being influenced by Mara and functioning through that as well. So Mara will try to influence animals afflicted spirits, and then human beings. And now the more diluted that these minds become, the more craving, anger, and ignorance they have, it's almost like on autopilot, because Mara has influenced them enough that they're deep in the darkness, and now they're just doing unwholesome things in the world all around them. But again, it's that person's decision, or it's that animal's decisions, it's that afflicted spirit's decisions. Just like if you, say, had like a childhood friend who's trying to influence you to steal or lie or use some drugs or alcohol, and that friend is constantly trying to tempt you to do those things, it's your decisions of whether you do that or not that's going to produce any particular result. So Mara can try to influence you or influence you through other beings, but it's up to you to decide whether you're going to do that thing or not. So that's why by the time you get to the first jhana, you've cultivated enough wisdom that Mara knows, like, there's no way that Mara can influence you, that you have too much wisdom, that you're not going to choose to do these unwise things that Mara is trying to influence you to do and motivate you to do. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else. So I'm just going to end class the way I normally do by just thanking all of you guys for joining for today's class, and invite you to our next class where I'm going to be in volume 2, chapters 31 through 40. You can read those ahead of time if you like, or after class, it's up to you. Some people like to read before and after class if you like, because remember, there's a lot of details here in the chapter that I actually don't cover in the class. Here I'm just giving you kind of like a brief overview, but in the chapter itself, there's a lot of details that you're going to need. So if you're not reading the individual chapters of the words of the Buddha and the words that I'm sharing, then you're not getting the full benefit of learning in this program. So if you need to read before class or after class, it doesn't matter. If you're able to dedicate some time to that, that would be really wise and really helpful. If for some reason you don't have that at all and you just come to class, okay, that's better than nothing. But if you can, devote some time and attention to reading the full chapter. And then tomorrow in our group learning program, I'm going to be in volume 1, chapter 16, which is dissolving the ego. Ego serves no purpose. I'm going to teach you how to eliminate the ego. First, I'm going to teach you what it is, and then how to eliminate it using the various tools and techniques. And I do that at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. on Sunday. And then on Monday, I'm starting a Foundation in the Path to Enlightenment course. So you're always welcome to join that either at the temple here in Chiang Mai or through the live stream in Zoom and things like that. So thank you all for joining, and perhaps we'll see you guys in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee krap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.